The house was quiet when the knock came. It was late, well past midnight, the kind of deep silence that only appears after a long winter day. Outside, a light snowfall drifted slowly across the quiet street in Portland. The houses along the block were dark, their windows dim, and the world seemed to be asleep. Inside the Harper home, Daniel Harper was asleep too, resting after a long day of work. His life had followed the same calm routine for years. Work dinner with his son, a few quiet hours at home, and then sleep. It was a simple life, peaceful in many ways, but sometimes a little lonely. At exactly 12:17 a.m., 3 soft knocks broke the silence. Daniel stirred slightly in bed, unsure if he had dreamed the sound. For a moment he lay still, listening to the quiet house. Then the knock came again, gentle, careful, almost nervous. Daniel sat up quickly. His heart began to beat a little faster because there was only one person who would knock on his bedroom door at that hour. His son, Dad. A small voice called through the door. Daniel stood immediately and walked over, opening it without hesitation. Ethan stood there in the hallway, wrapped in his blue blanket. His hair was messy from sleep, and the hallway light behind him cast a soft glow around his small figure. "Hey, buddy," Daniel said gently, his voice still heavy with sleep. "Everything okay?" Ethan nodded slowly, but did not smile. "I just needed to talk." That surprised Daniel. Ethan was 12 years old, quiet and thoughtful. Since the divorce 2 years earlier, he had become even more careful with his emotions. He loved his father deeply, but he rarely woke him in the middle of the night unless something serious was bothering him. Daniel stepped aside. "Come in." Ethan walked into the room slowly and sat on the edge of the bed, holding the blanket close to his chest. Daniel closed the door softly and sat beside him. The room was dim except for a small bedside lamp that Daniel switched on. The soft yellow light filled the room with warmth, while the cold winter night stayed outside the window. For a moment, Ethan said nothing. Daniel waited patiently. Over the years, he had learned that Ethan spoke best when he didn't feel rushed. Pushing him to talk usually made him quiet again. Finally, Ethan spoke. "Dad, can I ask you something?" "Of course," Daniel replied. Ethan stared at the floor for a few seconds before speaking again. "Do people ever stop loving someone?" The question caught Daniel off guard. It was not the kind of question most children asked after midnight. It carried a quiet weight that made Daniel sit a little straighter. "Why are you asking that?" he asked carefully. Ethan sighed and leaned forward slightly. "Mom seems happier now." Daniel nodded slowly. Ethan's mother, Laura, had remarried about a year earlier. Her new husband, Mark, was kind and respectful, and Ethan spent some weekends at their home across town. Still, divorce always left small questions behind. "And you're always alone," Ethan added softly. Daniel gave a small smile. "I'm okay, Ethan, but children often notice the feelings adults try to hide." Daniel worked as an architect, and his job kept him busy during the day. But the evenings were quieter. After dinner and homework, Ethan usually went to bed while Daniel stayed up watching old movies or reading books in the living room. He had grown used to the silence, but Ethan clearly noticed it. "I just don't want you to feel lonely," Ethan said. Daniel felt a small wave of emotion rise in his chest. It was easy to forget that children worried about their parents, too. He placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "I'm not lonely when you're here," he said honestly. Ethan looked up for a moment, then nodded slowly. But something else was still on his mind. Daniel could see it in his eyes. "What else is bothering you?" Daniel asked gently. Ethan hesitated. "Someone came to the house today." Daniel frowned slightly. "Someone?" Ethan nodded. "A lady." Daniel tried to remember if anyone had mentioned visiting. The mail carrier, a neighbor, or someone from work perhaps. But nothing came to mind. "What did she want?" he asked. Ethan shifted on the bed. "She asked if you still lived here." Daniel's curiosity grew. "Did she say who she was?" Ethan nodded again. "She said she knew you a long time ago." Daniel leaned back slightly, thinking, "Did she leave her name?" Ethan looked up at him. "She said her name was Claire." The name hit Daniel like a quiet echo from the past. Claire Bennett. For a moment, Daniel didn't speak, his mind filled with memories he had not visited in many years. College days filled with laughter, long walks through the campus park, late-night coffee shops, and dreams about the future. Claire had been his first real love. They had met when they were both young, hopeful, and certain that life would follow the plans they made together. But life had its own plans. After college, Claire moved to another state for her career, while Daniel stayed in Oregon for his architecture job. Distance slowly changed their relationship, and eventually they went separate ways. They both married other people. Years passed. Daniel had not seen her in almost 15 years. He slowly looked back at Ethan. What did she say exactly? Ethan thought for a moment. She smiled a lot, he said. She seemed nice. Daniel couldn't help but smile faintly. That sounded like Claire. She said she might come back tomorrow. The room became very quiet. Outside the window, the snow continued to fall gently onto the empty street. Everything felt calm, but inside Daniel's mind, thoughts moved quickly. Why would Claire suddenly appear after so many years? Was it just coincidence? Or something more? Ethan studied his father carefully. You looked different when I said her name, he said. Daniel blinked. Different? Ethan nodded. Like you remembered something important. Daniel laughed softly, though the feeling inside him was deeper than he expected. Maybe I did. Ethan leaned back slightly, thinking, was she your friend? Daniel considered the question. Yes, he said finally. A very important friend. Ethan seemed satisfied with that answer for the moment. After a few minutes, the quiet of the night began to return. Ethan looked tired again, the late hour catching up with him. He leaned against his father's shoulder. Dad? Yeah. Maybe people don't stop loving someone. Daniel looked down at him. What do you mean? Ethan shrugged slightly. Maybe they just wait a long time. Daniel didn't answer right away. Sometimes children said simple things that carried surprising wisdom. He wrapped an arm around Ethan and let him rest there for a while. Eventually, Ethan's breathing slowed and he fell asleep beside him on the bed. Daniel carefully laid him down and covered him with a blanket. But Daniel did not sleep. He sat quietly in the dim light, thinking about the past he believed was finished. Claire Bennett. The name alone stirred memories of laughter, dreams, and a version of himself that once believed life would unfold perfectly. He wondered what her life had been like all these years. He wondered why she had come looking for him now. Outside, the snow continued falling until the street was completely white. Morning eventually came, bringing a pale winter sun and a new day. Daniel went to work as usual, but his mind kept drifting back to the same question. Would she really come back? All day, he found himself distracted. When evening finally arrived, Daniel returned home, cooked dinner with Ethan, and tried to focus on their usual routine. But both of them seemed to be waiting for something. The sky slowly turned dark outside the window. The house grew quiet again. Then, just as the last light of the day faded behind the rooftops, the doorbell rang. Daniel froze for a moment. He didn't need to look through the window. Somehow he already knew who was standing on the other side of the door. Daniel stood still for a moment after the doorbell rang. The sound echoed softly through the quiet house, but inside him it felt loud and urgent. He wiped his hands on a kitchen towel, trying to calm the sudden nervous energy rising in his chest. Ethan looked up from the living room couch, curiosity bright in his eyes. Are you going to open it? Ethan asked. Daniel nodded, though his steps felt heavier than usual as he walked toward the door. Years of routine had made his life predictable, and this moment felt like stepping into something unknown. He opened the door. Claire Bennett stood on the porch, snowflakes resting lightly on her coat. The porch light framed her face, and for a second Daniel felt as if time had folded in on itself. She looked older, of course. So did he. But her warm expression was the same one he remembered from years ago. Hi, Daniel, she said gently. Her voice carried familiarity, calm and kind. Hi, Claire, he replied, almost surprised by how natural it felt to say her name again. They stood there for a brief moment, both smiling politely, both clearly aware of the long history between them. Claire held a small paper bag in her hands. "I brought cookies," she said with a soft laugh. I wasn't sure if that was strange, but it felt less awkward than showing up empty-handed. Daniel smiled and stepped aside. "Come in. It's cold out there." She walked into the house slowly, glancing around with quiet interest. Family photos lined the wall, pictures of Ethan growing up, school events, vacations, small moments captured over the years. The home felt warm, lived in, and peaceful. "It's a beautiful place," she said. "Thank you," Daniel replied. "It's simple, but it works for us." Ethan appeared from the living room, unable to hide his excitement. "You came back," he said. Claire laughed warmly. "I promised I might." Ethan introduced himself again, even though they had already met briefly the day before. Claire spoke with him easily, asking about school and his favorite hobbies. Daniel watched the interaction quietly, surprised at how quickly the atmosphere relaxed. There was no awkwardness, no forced conversation. It felt natural, almost familiar. They moved into the kitchen, where Daniel poured coffee while Claire placed the cookies on a plate. Snow continued falling outside, tapping gently against the windows. So Daniel said carefully, "What brings you back to Portland?" Claire wrapped her hands around the warm mug before answering. "My sister lives nearby," she said. "I came to help her move. And while I was here, I started thinking about old friends." Daniel nodded slowly. He sensed there was more to the story, but he allowed her to continue at her own pace. "My life changed a few years ago," she added quietly. "My husband passed away after a long illness." Daniel's expression softened. "I'm sorry, Claire." She gave a small, appreciative smile. "Thank you. It was a difficult time, but it also made me rethink many things. I realized how fast life moves, and how easy it is to lose touch with people who once mattered deeply." Her words hung gently in the air. Daniel understood that feeling. After his divorce, he had focused only on moving forward, rarely looking back. "I didn't know if you'd even want to see me," Claire admitted, "but I thought I'd regret it if I didn't try." "I'm glad you did," Daniel said honestly. The conversation flowed more easily after that. They spoke about careers, family, and the years that had shaped them into different versions of their younger selves. There was laughter when they remembered old college stories and quiet understanding when they talked about hardships. Ethan listened for a while before excusing himself to finish homework upstairs, leaving Daniel and Claire alone at the table. A comfortable silence settled between them. "It's strange," Claire said. "I expected this to feel awkward." "Me too," Daniel admitted. "But it doesn't." She smiled. "Some connections don't disappear. They just pause." Daniel looked at her thoughtfully. He realized he felt lighter than he had in years. Not because the past had returned, but because talking to someone who knew his younger self reminded him of parts of his personality he had forgotten. Claire stood and walked toward the living room, stopping to look at a framed photo of Daniel and Ethan at the beach. "You're a good father," she said softly. Daniel joined her. "I try. He helped me get through some hard years." Claire nodded. "Children have a way of doing that." Time passed quickly. Outside, the snowfall slowed, leaving the neighborhood quiet and glowing under streetlights. Eventually, Claire picked up her coat. "I should go," she said. "I don't want to keep you up too late." Daniel walked her to the door. For a brief moment, neither spoke. The air felt full of unspoken thoughts. "I'm really glad you came," he said. "So am I," she replied. She hesitated before opening the door. "I don't want to complicate your life, Daniel. I just wanted to reconnect." He considered her words carefully. For years, he had avoided emotional risks, choosing safety and routine instead. But standing there now, he realized something important. Life rarely offered second chances so gently. "Would you like to come for dinner tomorrow?" he asked. "Nothing formal. Just us." Claire's expression brightened with genuine surprise. "I'd like that," she said. She stepped outside, the cold air rushing in briefly before the door closed behind her. Daniel watched through the window as she walked down the snowy path, her figure slowly disappearing into the quiet street. He felt different. Not overwhelmed, not confused, just awake in a way he hadn't felt for a long time. Behind him, Ethan appeared in the hallway, rubbing his eyes sleepily. "So," Ethan asked. Daniel smiled. "So, she's nice." Ethan grinned. "I knew it." Daniel laughed softly. "You should be asleep." Ethan shrugged. "I just wanted to see if you were smiling." Daniel realized he was. Ethan leaned against the wall thoughtfully. "You look happier." Daniel paused, considering the truth of that statement. Happiness hadn't arrived suddenly or dramatically. It felt quieter than that, like a window opening after a long winter. "Maybe I am," he admitted. Ethan nodded, satisfied, and headed back to bed. Later that night, Daniel sat alone in the living room, but the silence no longer felt heavy. Instead, it felt peaceful, filled with possibility rather than emptiness. He thought about how life rarely followed perfect plans. Relationships ended, paths changed, and years passed quickly. Yet sometimes people reappeared at exactly the right moment, not to recreate the past, but to build something new with the wisdom time had given them. The next evening arrived faster than expected. Daniel and Ethan prepared dinner together, laughing as they cooked. The house felt warmer, filled with anticipation rather than routine. When the doorbell